few weeks, we will be out and we will reconvene. What is that? January 7th or something? January 10th. So we'll be back January 10th in some capacity. And Sam and Joel have a bit of a plan today. So it's your turn now.
Maybe I'll start and then I'll kick it over to Joel. So what we're going to do today is we're initially going to talk about workflow, particularly with Lasioglossum, but this goes in general, and then open up the door for individual questions. It might be about guides, it might be about identifications, it might be like, hey, here's a picture of a specimen that I don't know what this is. Can you help we'll put that up and we'll try and CSI that. It could be really anything with, let's say the initial focus at least being Lasioglossum, but if things taper off, we'll go to other topics. So I think a thing we wanted to talk about here is, okay, so we all are involved with big projects. We have, at some point, we'll have a bunch of pinned labeled specimens. And I'll point out that you always want to have, for those of you who haven't done this already, you want to have an individual number, marker, or something on each of those specimens so you can move them around. But in the end, you have boxes and boxes, trays and trays of specimens, and now you have to identify them. What's that workflow? So I'll give mine, Joel give his, other people who are on the list can talk about theirs too, but we end up with a bunch of specimens in boxes, and they're not in any particular order as they get pinned, right? That's not efficient. We have people who are volunteers doing the pinning. They pin all bees and wasps because, sometimes they make mistakes when what's a wasp, what's a bee. So we're confronted by that. Then we turn those boxes over to someone, and it could be a technician, it could be a visitor, it could be Sydney, our lab manager, it could be the volunteers. And we say, hey, move these into categories of similar looking things. And even a person who doesn't know anything can move all the bumblebees into one place, the green bees into another. And depending on how discerning they are, it's useful. So that's one less time that I have to pick up something and move it around. And also I'm confronted by clear groups of things. So I have fewer times that I have to organize, let's say I have 10,000 bees. So I might be scattered across 25 boxes. So rather than having to scatter across all 25 boxes and each box being some random subset, I can hone it in. All the dialectics can go in one box, all the green bees another, and then I can more quickly move through those with fewer labels having to be printed out. And so when I do that, I've now got a morphosorted collection just by eye, not even under the microscope. If what I do is I just go through everything and I identify everything that I can, Lasioglossum or not, that I can look at under the microscope without having to look up any key stuff. I set aside everything that I need to spend some more time on this, or it's a particularly dirty specimen, or it's something that I know that I need to consult a guide or a key of some kind on. And so I very quickly take care of most of the collection. And what that looks like for us, because we also have to prepare as we do these identifications for data. Sorry, a little short of breath. Data entry. So what that looks like for us is we use foot-by-foot pizza boxes with foam in the bottom because a lot of workspace. So we'll put a det label in front of a row of bees. Okay, so not under the specimen. So it's very easy for the data entry person to see that. So there's a determination label, and we're now going to bigger format determination label. So there's less guessing about what was scribbled on there. And then to the right, left to right, top to bottom, is a set of the specimens that are associated with that det label. So each specimen does not get a det label. It's just the front of the row. If it's vertical, it's a female. If it's horizontal, it's a male. We organize everything so that all the males are always, if present, at the end of that row. And we pin the very first label of the very first male in that row in place, because what happens? Labels start spinning, and then all of a sudden it's not clear to the data entry person, am I looking at a male or female? And we have big spaces, relatively big spaces between each specimen in those boxes, because we're scanning things in, and we're scanning things in using a barcode reader. And even with it necked down to a fairly precise level, it's sometimes what happens if they're jammed together, as you would say packing and sending to someone. The problem is if you're trying to scan those, sometimes the scanner will pick up something above, below, left, or right, and it obviously creates problems. So we minimize that by really spacing things out. And then in the end, the specimens are now entered by someone. Usually Sydney then goes back, and we have some routines that check for incorrect names, comparing a master list to the lists that were entered. And then we also look and do counts to make sure that everything went in, there wasn't something missed. Spacing them out helps with the missed counts too, because it's relatively straightforward to hit all those specimens. And that's pretty much it. So I'm going to turn it over to Joel, and Joel, you can tell me, or tell all of us, how do you deal with, okay, I'm sending you 10,000 specimens, or you collected for a big project. How do you approach dealing with that?
Okay. So if it's just all sorts of bees, like all the genera and all the families, I'll start by just sorting them out by genus. And if you don't know all the genera by sight, then you could do what Sam does and just do morphosorting. But I usually know all the genera, so I just sort those out first. And then if I have a box of bees that's one genus, but all the species are mixed together, I'll just start identifying the species from the top left, like what Sam said that you could do. That's not what he does. And I'll identify the first specimen, and I'll keep going until I get to a specimen that I don't know, or I'm having trouble, or I run into an obstacle in the key. And when I run into that, I'll set those ones aside somewhere and make a note to myself, like, this is a difficult one, I don't know. And then I'll keep going through, and then usually what happens is, or the hope is, that I'll find more of those difficult ones. So then I eventually could accumulate like a series of these ones that I didn't know before. And once you have a series instead of just one bee, it often happens that it clicks for you. So like bees, especially Lasioglossum, which is what I'm usually identifying, there's a lot of morphological variation. So if you have like one bee, maybe it's like kind of at one end of the variation spectrum, where it's a little bit duller, it's a little bit more rugulose. But then if you have a series of them, you're like, oh, this species usually is more shiny and punctate. So having a series can often help you get difficult IDs. So if I get a difficult one that I don't know, like, don't struggle with it, just kind of set it aside, and then just keep going through the box left to right then.
So Sam gives the advice of bees per minute. Don't spend more than 5 minutes on a bee as you go, which is tough. Joel, what do you think about that?
I don't do that. That's sometimes you can't help it. Like sometimes it's just, I mean, if you have like a really long key, sometimes it's just gonna take more than 5 minutes, especially if you have to go into the collection and get comparative specimens to look at. It depends on whether you're doing like initial sorting or whether you're trying to get final determinations. For initial sorting, yeah, you could try doing a 5 minutes per bee rule, and then anything you can't get in 5 minutes, you set aside and do later.
Yeah, I think that's what Sam's advised for me. And I think that some of our earliest classes with you and Jason of going through those tricky groups has really helped with my own sorting and just being like, oh, okay, I know that's in the versatum. Like, I know it's in one of those groups instead of having to go through them quite as narrowly and then coming back in that kind of string way that you were both talking about. So if you're having trouble with that, folks, we have some early classes posted on those.
Actually, with the Lasioglossum, I often know which ones are going to take more than 5 minutes without having to try doing it. Like, I'll look at one and be like, oh, that's in the viridatum group. And actually, I noticed there's some questions in the chat about ad random versus versatum. So if I see those when I'm looking at a box of Lasioglossum, I'm like, oh, those are going to take more than 5 minutes. I'm going to set those aside and get a series and do them later.
Speaking of ad random and versatum, that is the first question in the chat and also in 2 emails that I received. So I feel like maybe talking about them, maybe if we have the chance, or definitely returning to them when we go back through the dialectist key, or multiple times because so many people have asked the question. Also have some questions in the chat about identifying an alcohol. So whichever we want to tackle first.
Well, maybe we should ask you, Claire, how you do your sorting and approach a big collection, and then open it up and see if anyone else wants to talk about, you know, their experiences, because we have quite a diversity of people here. If they have something to add, we'd like to hear it, because it's helpful to other people who are either just starting or we just learn things.
That's a good point. Well, being your student, pretty much what you have advised, though going through all of these classes with y'all and Mike and whatnot, it's been much more helpful, like I just said, being able to jump into, jump beyond the genera, right? Like you and Joel mentioned, usually we can get that through that spot on site kind of thing. I really like that our text and my Sally does a lot of that morpho sorting from the beginning. So I'm not looking at a whole random string. They're at least in groups of, these are all bumblebees and these are all in the Megachilidae and all of that. And then going through those and getting them into genera. And like you and Joel said, hopefully a lot of those you can just do as you run. And then it's been really helpful for me, particularly with our subgenera classes, to my first run through some stuff that I do need to key out. Maybe I'll run them through those keys first. You know, maybe not for the Lasioglossum needing to do the key necessarily, but at least grouping them. The weakness that I have is that once I'm in species realm, spending the less than 5 minutes and moving on and making the strings that, you know, that you've just mentioned. So I learned from you guys, and so I don't have all that different of a method. But yeah, my main thing is that having gone through these classes and all of our subgenera conversations, I think those have been the most helpful in speeding up my process.
I'll show a box. This is a box of Lasioglossum that I have, that's sort of the end of the line. So these were the tough ones. And just like Joel said, you know, I've got some that are groups, and in the end, there's a bunch that are Lasioglossum species, because I can't quite tell what's going on. There's an interesting group that I call Lasioglossum interesting that I think could be something. It's not that the specimen is messed up, but I can't put a name on it. And then you can see in the, would that be the upper left of the screen, that there's a whole series of angled specimens there, and I still have to assign them to something, which might be Lasioglossum species, but you can see the spacing and then the name. In this case, it's because of the camera, it's reversed. And these are all female, so there's no horizontal ones, but they've been in my car as I go back and forth, and you can see they get twisted a little bit. But that's just an example of our end product workflow for those interested. Is there anyone outside of the three of us who have spoken who want to share some workflow experiences or something different?
But I'm going to bounce in real quick before I let Matt talk. So having the advantage of being in your lab with you, I'll do the depths that I'm pretty confident about in the white label. But then when I'm still learning, or I'm just like, I think it's one of these three, I will use the pink so that when Sam has ID'd it, I can go back and check my thoughts. And if I'm between a couple, I'll even like write them all down. And then what I like to do is I'll pin into the det that I think is the most likely. So for me, that would look like what Sam had just shown of the det label at the beginning of a string. And then on any one in those that I'm like, it's one of these three, I'd have this actually on the specimen. So that's a way that I found more useful for learning and feedback after trying a lot of different things, like writing notes and then trying to remember why I was looking at those notes. So if that's helpful to you and you have a great relationship with someone like Sam or Joel or somebody checking your bees, a suggestion for you. Matt has his hand raised. So Matt, come on in.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention this comes a little earlier in the process, but one of the things I'm really obsessed with is making sure that I have either the plant genus, or if it's, a bulk collection or something, the collection method on the label, which I find helps a lot of times in the identification process. Like, Sam does a lot of my IDs, but then sometimes I'll be like, hey, let's look at this again, because, it just happened to us recently where there was a species where, if you can glance at the label and see when it was collected and on what, you might catch, something that doesn't make sense. So I just wanted to mention that because it's, I think, an important part of my process. It not only obviously provides more information to the specimen in the future, but it also helps with ID checks and just making sure everything makes sense with the species you end up coming up with. They're less important for Lasioglossum than for Andrina and some of those other groups, but just in general, I like to make sure I stick to that practice pretty religiously.
It's true. So
Anyone else?
I want to, I know Dylan's here and we like your bees, and I see a couple of other people who send us their bees. Does anyone feel called to say what they do?
Looks like Ellen has her hand raised.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. So I work on British bees. I live in the UK. And last year I did a project where they sent me the bees in little Eppendorf tubes, all in alcohol. And they weren't sorted to genus at all. And I found it so difficult to work on them. And it wasn't until the end of the project when I met up with some of the specialists, and they said, well, you can actually put them in the alcohol to identify them. So, because I was drying them out, and it's because I thought that would be easier. But then you've got to sort of hold them and manipulate them. It's really difficult without the pin. But they didn't want that. They didn't want us to pin them. They wanted them to go back in the Eppendorfs from a storage perspective. They wanted to be able to store them in the freezer. Yeah, I just found that really, really difficult. But not only it was difficult because of the manipulation of the bee under the microscope, but it was also difficult because I couldn't put them into groups and genus or genera. And that meant that I was working on a bombus, and then I was working on an Andrina, and then I was working on a Lasioglossum, and then I got the next pack out and I'd have to do the same again. So you never really got a workflow. So I think the putting things together, light groups together, is definitely a really, really good help. And we've only got 250 odd species of solitary bee as well, so it's not I can't imagine what it's like doing more than that. So.
Yeah, I'll point out that just identifying bee species in any kind of liquid is really tough and actually horrible for the person, as you were talking about. And because the problem to some extent is there's almost no shadow, because the refraction index of the liquid is so high, I guess it's high, that you see basically just a gray form in there, and actually you'll be surprised at how much little shadows, using your microscope lights to go across to see surface sculpturing, a lot of that just disappears, and then the hair color is vague, and like you mentioned, manipulating the specimen. So if anyone says, well, I'm just going to send these to you and you're going to need to identify them in alcohol, be prepared that you can only go so far. And some of these things may just have to be unidentified or identified to groups, and they should, if you're doing it for pay, they should pay you a heck of a lot more than identifying things on dried and well prepared and on pins.
Yeah, well, a lot of insects, it's not common for bees, but I mean, a lot of other insects, it's standard practice to keep them in ethanol, and they have like procedures for how you work with them. So if you ever have to do bees in ethanol, it's probably a good idea to copy what the other ethanol people are doing. So like usually when you're identifying specimens in ethanol, like you won't like take the bee out and hold it under the microscope and try to identify it, because you're gonna have a bad time if you do that. You get like a little dish, like something like this, little glass dish, and you fill it with ethanol, and you put the bee in there and make sure that it's completely submerged. Like Will Peterman says to do this in the chat. And when the bee is like actually submerged in the ethanol, then it's a lot easier to see all the surface sculpture, and all the seedy and the hairs will kind of like fluff up in the liquid. So it's not bad. The main problem still is manipulation. So the bee will want to like lie on its side usually when it's in an ethanol dish. And so like anything on the side of the bead, it's not hard to see. But if you need to see the dorsal surface, it's kind of you have to kind of wrestle with it to get it to stand up on its legs.
Okay. Are we ready for Amaranthum versus versatum? Any other specimen handling discussions?
Dylan, hop in.
I was just gonna say something just about like keeping yourself motivated while doing identifications. So like if you have a whole suite of bees, sometimes if I leave all of the Lasioglossums for the end, then I have a really hard time motivating. So sometimes I'll try to like alternate the Lasioglossums with like the megachilids or the caletids or something, just so like I don't leave all the hard ones at the end, and then I have like a really hard time with motivation.
Yeah, no, true. One thing, Joel mentioned this, and I do the same thing. Some of the Lasioglossums are like not a dream, but they are easier, and you can identify them pretty quickly with a little bit of experience. Like, oh, that's Lasioglossum bruneri. So you can take that, 2,000 Lasioglossum bunch, go through it once, pull out those and ID imitatum, bruneri, a few others, depending on, how far in you've gone. And now all of a sudden you have fewer. And then you can go in, and if you feel like, oh, this is overwhelming, another thing to do is morphosort your Dialectus, your Lasioglossum. So you can do that by eye, like, oh, I'm going to put all the dark ones here. I find it useful to morphosort things by the aconarial fan. You know, does it have complete? Does it have large? Does it have short? Or does it have none? And then is what you want to, in my opinion, you incrementally recut those each time. So now I've got all the complete fan ones. So I'm going to take those complete fan ones and I'm going to look for another feature. Might be size, it might, but it's just one. It's not like, well, these are bluish with, you know, a complete fan and a lot of pelosity on the abdomen, and these are some other variation. Too many variables. It's like, I'm going to go back through all the complete fan ones and I'm just going to pull out everything that's got no or little tomentum on the abdomen, and then keep doing that until you have a series of morphosorted things that you feel cannot be divided any further. And you're in where Joel was talking about, which is some things just then begin to click just by having looked at a lot of things versus starting with one, peeing it out, and then going to two, which is probably a different one. And I think it makes the project more tractable, and you have broken it down into smaller clumps that should be, yeah, shouldn't drive you insane. And of course, you're listening to podcasts and things like that. So, and having a nice cup of tea.
Anyone else to pop in? I thought Eric might have shown up in the chat.
I was just going to say also, and I think this was from Sam, a suggestion from Sam that is totally true. I don't really understand it, but you can spend time staring at bees at and not be able to get anywhere. And then if you just step away from them and come back like the next day or look at something else, somehow you have like this epiphany and you're like, oh, there it is. So sometimes you really do need to just like step away from a while, because like you've just developed some kind of blindness that you're not seeing it. And Sam told me that, and I've used that ever since, and it really speeds it up because I don't sit there agonizing over it for like an hour.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Eric has his hand raised. You guys, we're a small enough group. You guys can just pop in.
Hey, so this is actually Caitlin. Eric and I are in the same office, but I am Eric's aide, based up in Brookings, South Dakota. But so I did all of our Dialectus sorts. We had a cabinet of about 10,000 Lasioglossum that I went through this summer, and I had about no bee identification experience before this job. But my big thing was taking those, breaking it into Dialectus alone, and then from there looking at the fans, breaking them into separate groups, and then down to looking at the pitting on the mesoepicertum and the scutum, and then looking at the relative shape of the head were like my big three characters that I used. And then from there, taking those morpho groups and kind of running them through the key definitely helped me a lot. So I didn't have to run every single one through the key. Saved a lot of time too.
And I verified a lot of those Dialectus identifications a few weeks ago, and they were pretty good. I had no idea that Caitlin had no prior bee identification experience. Looking at those bees, I would have guessed somebody did it who was working on them for years.
high praise there, Caitlin.
That's awesome.
Thank you. It means a lot.
Yeah, the viridatum group was a struggle, but the viridatum group is a struggle for everybody.
Well, shall we dive into versatum? I mean, we can, if anyone comes up with something or is feels like they have to bring something in, that's fine, I would say. But maybe not viridatum, versatum versus admirandum. Joel, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So
Maybe mention what, for some people, why are people asking that question?
why are people asking it? Because they're hard. They're hard to tell apart. Did you have a different answer that you were expecting?
Well, I mean, what are the characters that pull those two together in addition to the being hard? You know, like the pitting on T2 and the echinarial fan, like what's the generic thing here in terms of that group? The versatum and also trigeminum and calidum groups all have heavy pitting throughout T2 all the way to the rim, that kind of thing. And then why then explain, you know, the differences, and then I think people will get an understanding for the fact that they end up with these, and these are common bees. Depending on where you are, you might lean more versatum, you might be more admirandum, and then you're throwing in things like trigeminum and to mix things up. But those two have at least a little bit of a, depending on the specimen, swelling in the front trochanter, which is a useful character. But again, trigeminum, for example, can be a very sketchy on the edge thing. And so some of those end up in the, I can't tell. But does that make sense, Joel, in terms of what's the ties?
So the versatum group is not actually part of the viridatum group, but it looks very superficially similar. And I think if you did a phylogeny of them, the versatum group would probably be like a basal lineage branching off from the viridatum group. So the thing that sort of ties these species together is they both have an incomplete acarinarial fan, which most dialectists actually have a complete fan, but you wouldn't know that just from looking at a collection of random dialectists that you got, because you're probably going to, like if you're in the East or you're in the Midwest where the viridatum group is really common, you're probably going to get a ton of specimens with an incomplete fan, and then you're going to think that's the more common state, but actually the complete fan is the ancestral condition and the more common character state. It's just that these are so common. So they both have an incomplete fan uniting them, which is like probably the best character. And they have a sort of rugulose, impunctate mesopisternum. So there's no punctures on the side of the bee below the wing, which is another kind of uncommon character in Dialectus. Most of the other ones are punctate. And they have the rims of the terga kind of filled with distinct punctures. So those three things make admirandum and versatum look pretty superficially similar. Fan, the mesopisternum, and the terga punctures. The way that you tell the difference between them is, see, the key separates them based on head length and the scutum being flattened or convex, and then the width of the opening in the acarinarial fan. So the width of the acarinarial fan is actually pretty hard to judge. I actually don't use that character much. It's kind of hard to judge, and it's kind of subjective. But the head shape definitely is different. Also, Sam mentioned that for trochanters, that's actually not in the key because, again, in versatum, it's a little bit hard to see. It's much more much more pronounced in calidum and trigeminum. But even versatum will have a slightly flattened, slightly expanded front trochanter. So you can look at that. And then there's also just the sculpture, that especially like the metasomal terga, will just look kind of different. It's hard to explain, but the punctures are a little bit more regular, a little bit more distinct in versatum. And yeah, the scutum is another good character. So let's see, should I guess I can show pictures from the key. I have specimens too, but I'd have to go into the collection and get them out.
Yeah, no, I think showing pictures in the key, because when you went through those species in earlier classes, we were just doing it from the microscope. And I'm not even sure if I sent out, because of size of key, if I was able to send out the full key. So bringing those up, I think those are really good photographs. So if you bring those up, that would be awesome.
Okay, so I'm going to share. All right, I'm sharing the 2010, Jason's 2010 key to the Dialectics of Canada, which is kind of superseded by the 2022 update key. But the 2010 one is still useful because it has all the pictures and descriptions in it. So if you want to know what an ad random looks like, it's in this key. So this is ad random. And here's the head. And if you look at the head shape, the lower margins are like pretty strongly convergent. It's kind of coming to a point down at the clypeus, and the clypeus is also projecting pretty far below. So if you draw an imaginary line across the bottoms of the compound eyes like this, and then you look at how far the clypeus protrudes below that line, it's like maybe like half the clypeus is protruding below that line. That's called the suborbital tangent, this imaginary line. So if you ever see a reference to the clypeus and the suborbital tangent, this is what it's talking about. So the clypeus is like kind of strongly projecting in ad random, with the lower part of the face kind of convergent. So it's more of a I'm trying to think of a good analogy. It's kind of a more pointy face, less perfectly round. And then if you look at the scutum too, it's kind of hard to see in these pictures, but it'll be kind of convex. So the top of the scutum will be gently curved so that when the light reflects off of it, it will be uneven. So there'll be like one light patch, and then the rest of the scutum will kind of be in shadow, like in here. There's like one light patch, the rest of it is darker. Here it's kind of distorted by the pin, but you can kind of see that it's rounded. It's not flat. Versatum, navigate to.
Well, just in addition to those characters, I find that it's not absolute, but a lot of things aren't absolute here, that the tegula tend to be at that yellow end of the spectrum, often very bright yellow. And in versatum, it's at the brown end of the spectrum, often dark brown. And that on the scutum, ad random can be a little bit variable, but in versatum, you get more of this color that you're seeing here, sort of a green blue rather than a mostly blue type of looky thing. And then you'll, I'm sure, talk about sputum flatness and other things too, but those are just some observations.
Yeah, those are good observations. So they're not 100% reliable because color does vary more than other characters. But yeah, definitely versatum does tend to have these really dark brown tegulae. And then if you recall that ad random picture that was just up, those that do tend to be brighter yellow. You do have to be careful though, because trigeminum exists, and trigeminum has more bright yellow tegulae and more bluish color too. So that's another one to throw into this mix. Actually, trigeminum and ad random would probably be harder to tell apart than versatum and ad random. I think those are trickier. Because trigeminum does not have the flat sputum like versatum does. So here's a versatum. Again, this is in the 2010 key. And if you look at the sputum here, it's flat, and you can tell that because of the way the light reflects off of it. So you see there's like much more even reflections on the sputum. It's like the whole surface is kind of evenly illuminated. You don't get like one light patch and the rest of it is dark. So you can kind of tell by looking at like, oh, that is pretty flattened. And if you look at it in lateral view, it'll be like almost straight across. It's hard to see with all the hairs in the way, but if you have like an actual specimen, you can like rotate around. You can see that it'll be flattened. Then the head is also very different. So here we have a much rounder head. It's not so pointy at the bottom. The clypeus is not so strongly protruding. So if we draw this invisible line across the bottoms of the ocelli, and you get here, it's like, the clypeus is like, it's like maybe like 1/3 of it is projecting below that suborbital tangent. And it's not so strongly converging below the compound eyes. I think I might have said ocelli a few seconds ago. If I did, I meant compound eyes. And let's see. Yeah, so that is how I tell those apart.
Jason, wonder about your opinion on this. So I find that in a relatively subtle but kind of average way, that the aconarial fan in versatum is wider and has a wider opening at the top and than admirandum. But admirandum is not at all like it's got a super pinched. It's just a little bit more a little more narrowed, I guess I would put it. But is that something that I'm making up in my head, or would you say?
That is a character in the key. So this one has a pretty narrow opening. This picture of versatum, that's a pretty narrow opening. And I think if we go back, there's admirandum. That's a pretty wide opening there. Kind of hard to see because there's a little bit of glare there, but that like here to here is probably where the opening is in that fan. So that is wider. I think that actually is what it says in the key. You can find that couplet again.
Actually, I would have said the opposite, but again, it's not a primary character for me, and I could be misreading it.
Okay, here it is. Yeah, you're right. The key does say that the fan opening is wider in versatum, but maybe that's why I don't use that character, because it definitely looked to me in those pictures like it was the other way around.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to judge.
Yeah. This is a good case again where getting down to this group as a very general and then going through it several times. So don't be afraid. It's not like I have to pick this up and identify it and then put it into its final resting place. I think the way to think about these things is I'm going to pick up a number of these specimens several times and look at them several times. And when you get down to this group, you'll want to start doing your own comparisons. And like the versatum and admirantum has really a pretty different vibe. And you're lucky if you have both of those in there, because once you do, by going back and forth, through your pile and looking at them over and over again, you should be able to, particularly giving guidance like this, kind of move them into two distinct piles, not necessarily keying them that way, but by looking at them a lot. So that's another part of this, is that these tricky groups, it's not a one and done situation. It's, I think all of us who are doing this kind of thing are looking at these within a particular collection event or collection to begin with several times, and then going back through them to make sure that we didn't leak into a specimen one way or the other. So you get a visual sense of the specimens within a particular collection in these tricky ones.
We have two requests here to maybe some more specifics on the trigeminum. Tracy just jumped in, and we spent most of this time kind of being like, trigeminum is not this one. And oh, I missed it. Eric, what did you want? Oh, ephialtum, if I'm saying that correctly.
Ah, yeah, there you go. So Joel, I sent this to Jason. I should have, I don't think I copied you, but I should have. I was looking at some stuff from Michigan. It would have keyed to ephialtum. This is just one of these things that happen regularly. And it's like, here's a whole series, same date, same place, in a large collection from Michigan and several other places around the Great Lakes, but it has no aconarial fan, like nothing, but it also doesn't have the hairs like versants, and I guess some of the others that are much more less common coming out from that fan. It's simply gone, and it wasn't a one-off. And the area where the T1 bends over, so from the dorsal to the anterior face, right at that curve, and this is, I think, present largely in more or less in a lot of Lasioglossums, but we ignore it. There's a line of raised a latitudinal line of sparse raised hairs, and that's it. But it would key to ephialtum, but ephialtum usually has a pretty strong, in my opinion, aconarial fan, or certainly not absent, open to the top, but this was gone.
So every single specimen, it's just there's like absolutely no.
And they're really good specimens. This is not some like, oh, well, that's clearly just oppressed by bad goop, like clean, fresh, wings pop, all that kind of stuff. But no fan. All, and then weirdly, all from one place, one location, one date. So it may be a one-off, but I'm just throwing that out there because it was, the fan is such a wonderful, almost always, unless it's so obvious from some other reason, almost always taking a peek at each specimen's fan because it's illuminating in lots of subtle ways, but this was just gone. So,
yeah, that's really interesting. I've never seen that except in worn specimens. So
yeah.
I've
Not
seen
worn.
it like sometimes, but like not like a whole series where like every single specimen is completely
I think there
off.
were 8. So anyway,
Oh,
with Clare's, yeah, go ahead.
If it's only 8 specimens, it's plausible that all of them are just worn.
I would say probably not, but they all might be some related sport of Ephialtum or something. Anyway,
Well, there are.
Clare,
Sorry.
I say, do we have the concern of this particular zone getting worn in the same way that other areas of the Turgites might be?
It is a concern. If T1 gets worn and like the CD get rubbed off, it can really mess up identifications. I don't like relying on it so heavily in the keys, but it's such a good character that it's hard not to rely on it. There's certain species, especially subversans and Caneri, where the fan naturally has very, very, very short CD. Like it's like somebody took a razor and shaved it. And those 2 species are especially prone to having the fan rubbed off and worn. So like if you have like those species, it's actually pretty common to get a decent series where you get a bunch of specimens that look like they have no fan.
Well, I've set them aside.
Can you say those species again? Subversans and what?
And Caneri. So subversans is kind of like a northern boreal species, and then Caneri is like western U.S.
Yeah, the thing about it though is in this case that pushes against the idea that it's just worn away is there's this very delicate band of thin, long CT that should have been scraped off first, and they're all there. So anyway, I just don't want to lock the discussion up, but it was like, this is really interesting looking. You know, there's some that are like that. They're just like, this looks really different. I hope I see more of them because I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, where did you say they were from?
South of in Michigan on I guess maybe along near Lake Erie, south of Detroit, but not urban. It looked like it might have been a from Google Map, a field that was planted to be a pollinator field or something like that.
Yeah, well, if you want to send me any pictures or specimens, I'd be interested to see them.
Yeah, Sally can take pictures of those over the winter break.
Okay.
I might also bring up, we have in the Discover Life characters these like the like size of patches on the base of Turgites in like I think like our first page of the key. Why? We haven't really talked about them at all here.
So I think
that might be a you question.
Okay. So what Claire's talking about is, like T2 in particular, but sometimes you have hair across the whole segment, but a lot of times it's really just either nothing, maybe rarely like levissimum, there's a band, but a lot of times there's just like a triangle on the far sides. And so we have scored abdominal segments as whether they have a triangle or whether they have, or percent of oppressed hairs. And, we've scored them very broadly, but a lot of times I find that, like if I'm looking at Gotham or something like that, it's like, oh, I see those very strong triangle areas of oppressed hairs is a useful secondary character. And just in general, within abdominal hair patterns, the presence of a lot or a little or restricted amounts of hair are often characteristic. You know, you can get things like Cressonii, which has a weird T4, I think, pattern of lots of oppressed hairs and some longer whitish hairs that are somewhere in between that are like, oh, I see you there, little Cressonii, based on your, you know, your rear end. So hairs can be useful.
So do you suggest that be part of people's like first round of morphosorts since they're on like the front page of our key online?
Well, it can be. I mean, so you can morphosort on lots of different things. The butt hairiness in general is a really good character for separating out some big groups. Some basically have no oppressed hairs. There's quite a few. And then others can be incredibly hairy. You know, think of Pilosum paraadmirandum, you know, often will key ambiguously, but it's got just so much hair down there that that should always be in your mind. And then you can look for, you know, the fan and then the tessellations or the microscopic lines that it has, because those are a little more subtle. So it's a useful thing to keep in mind. And when you're morphosorting, that's a pretty, unless the specimen's really in bad shape, that's a pretty good character to try and lay out your specimens in terms of amount of hair. And you can come up with, when you're morphosorting, you have the world's your oyster, so you can come up with your own character in your mind, right? So because you're just splitting things into groups, and then you're iterating this until you feel confident. If you take it to the extreme, you feel confident that everything in a particular group is the same thing based on a whole series of characters, and you're going to pick it up, look at the rear end for each. Then you're going to pick it up, look at the fan for each, look at the head for each. And then doing that several times, you can come up with a confidence like whatever it is, these are all the same. And now you have, when you're keying it out, you have several different specimens to run through the key in case, like Joel said, you end up with some ambiguity, particularly again with a dichotomous key. So with the dichotomous key, you have to make decisions, or you start running multiple lines. And when you have a big key, that's tricky. So having a series allows you to look across that series and come up with a average state to plug into the key. And with Discover Life, of course, you can include or exclude whatever you want, or score broadly to be conservative, which is, you know, if you're guessing, game over, right? Same thing in all these keys. You need to stay with, I'm confident that this is either this thing, or maybe it's this or that when you're doing it.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in, speaking of those triangles of tomentum on T2. And in case you don't know what tomentum is, that's what Sam is talking about when he talks about oppressed hairs. So when we talk about tomentum, we mean those oppressed hairs, and they're like really densely plumose. So they're really thick and feathery, and they're going to be lying flat on the surface. That's tomentum. So in addition to T2, T1 and T3 are also really good to look at, especially the lateral edges of T1. If there's tomentum there, that's a really good morphosort character. And then T3, whether it's covering the whole segment or just in the basal corners, that's another good morphosort character.
And T4 can be pretty good just from the percentage. So a lot of times T4 doesn't really have triangles, is sort of my general impression, but it does have a density of these tomentum or oppressed hairs. And you look like how much of the segment, the integument below, is covered by the hair. And again, if you're morphosorting, this may not be in any of the keys, but if you're morphosorting, you know, you got a lot, you got a little, you got some scattered ones. So one of the tricky things within Jason's key is, in several instances, it's qualifying the absence of hair of this kind of tomentum on the abdomen, which leads me, I guess, into like, am I seeing this or not? Because it'll say largely absent, or I don't know the exact word, but it implies that it's absent of those kinds of hairs, but there might be a few, I don't want that door opened, but it's there. And so it's like, and I'll look at a specimen, it's like, do I have a few or is that a lot? But I have to make a decision or follow, as we often end up doing, 2 of those sets. But if you have a long series, that's where you want to be, because you can say like, look, they all have just a few hairs or maybe more or less. And that can help with making a decision. Guide making is really imperfect, and every single person who develops these guides has a different mindset in creating them. So, how well you resonate with a particular guide is basically on how well you're resonating with their mind.
We are past time, but I still have some time if we want to keep going. I don't know what your capacities are. We could bounce back. This was a great, glad I interrupted that, but if Eric's still around, epialtum, or come back to it when we do dialectus again? Question mark.
I think epialtum would be a good one for Joel to talk about a little bit, because it's epialtum. What does that mean? Like nightmare or something?
Yes, that is the basis of the etymology.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and it is. It's appropriately named. I still don't have a firm grasp on what is epialtum. So I oftentimes, like, especially out in the West where they're not as well studied, I won't even identify viridatum group specimens. I'll just put them as viridatum group. But in the East, sometimes I can feel confident putting a name on things, but all of those should be taken as somewhat provisional. The group really needs to be looked at more in depth, maybe with more next gen sequence data, which actually is something Jason is working on right now, which might provide some answers. But so epialtum is a tricky species. It's one of the ones that does not have those dense distinct punctures on T2. So it might have a few punctures. So it's one of those cases that Sam was talking about where it's like, oh, there's a few there. And then it makes it really hard to judge which way you should go in the key if there's just a few punctures. But if you have a series, or if you have some ad random or some versatum for comparison, and you can look at them side by side, then you can definitely see oh yeah, ad random has way more punctures than epialtum does on the rim of T2. Besides that, epialtum. What else is?
I think of it as pretty generic, and the very generic Lasioglossum dialectus group doesn't have those pitting, and then a lot of the others where you have to weigh things either are in that has a relatively shinier scutum area, or has almost no tomentum on the T2, 3, 4, and epialtum almost always, well, I would say always, but again, it's a little ambiguous here, but it very clearly has a bunch of tomentum down there. It's not like there's no question. And then the aconarial fan is open at the top. That's how you get down to, in Jason's key, to that area. And it's not super. Oh, there's Jason. Speak of the Ephialtum, and it's so I'll let Jason can explain a little bit further. So those are the characters that I use. The echinarial fan is open, but not like super widely open. All right, Jason, what's your favorite Ephialtum characters?
Ooh, I think I was told at one point, George Eichwart had talked about this group of bees that they're defining characters where they had no defining characters. I guess that's kind of Ephialtum. It's not as kind of dull. And microsculpture does something like a pair admirandum, and it's not as densely punctured on the turga as an admirandum or a versatum or something like that. It's kind of dark. I remember a lot of the the Ephialtums that I used to see were like the the kind of near Rori kind of identifications. They vaguely kind of are reminiscent of a versatum, but they're not quite there. They have kind of darker tegula than most, but they're not. They're not. The sculpturing is not as coarse as a Atwood eye or as kind of unique as a Dresbach eye. So it's defining characters. It has no defining characters. Basically, the problem.
Would you say that I've noticed, kind of looking at viridatum group species, there's one set of the viridatum group that has pretty fine punctures on the scutum, and then another set that has like larger, coarser punctures. Like Ephialtum is one of the fine punctured ones, and then like viridatum and Sagax are more coarsely punctate.
Yeah, I can buy into that. Although it's probably subtle. I mean, you probably have to look at a lot of
subtle, but I think it is. It might be a good character if you could quantify it.
I'm just bringing up some keys and stuff while I'm talking. Yeah, I have a kid sick at home, so that's why I didn't allow to.
It's cool that we're still running and you hopped in. We still have most of the class here.
School. Yeah, I just got back from running the other one to school. So.
Joan and Eric, if the thumbs up, are also wondering if, where, how are reference specimens available upon request. We have some. I sent them out. We can send out little boxes to groups, but there are a lot of the really, really common stuff. So actually what we've been talking about, maybe there's stuff in there. I don't know what our surplus collection is looking like at the moment. I think we're going through a cleaning.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reluctant to offer just because if I get a lot of requests, I'm behind on sending things back to people already. But I'm not opposed to trades or exchanges. So if someone wants to send me some Andrina from Florida, Pakistan, yeah,
black market bee trades.
But no, I'll put together the synoptic set of bees that I can. I mean, some things are common. Yeah, as you say, some things are common and easy to send, but rare things are rare. So, but I'm always happy to, I'm happy to build the collection here, and I'm happy to do that by exchanging specimens with people. So. Occasionally, a lot of people have been generous with giving me specimens, to keep, and, so I'm happy to sort of pay that forward too. So, but
Jason has bunches of our specimens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I fondly remember the first shipment of bees I ever got from Sam. It was very helpful.
He was, I have to say, he was like, there were a bunch of Paralictus things in there that Jason was extremely excited about.
Yeah, that was really neat. I mean, yeah, that was early days of me working on that like this. So I learned a lot from those. So yeah.
Well, we may have wrapped it up here for the holidays. Claire, anything else?
No, any other burning desires? I don't see anybody. I don't think I missed anything in the chat. Anybody?
Yeah, I see Beryl on there. I remember promising to send her some Zephyrs or something. So do that.
Okay. Well,
All right.
this is a nice
Thanks, everyone.
transition. I think our plan is to come back on the 10th and do this stepwise through the dialectus key, whichever you so choose to begin with. And then we'll probably have the opportunity to do this again of the, unique questions. I think open office hours are a good opportunity. We don't get to do that necessarily every class.
Great. Thanks,
yeah, it's
Claire.
possible. It's possible on January
Thanks,
10th
Joel.
I might be working from home too. So
Didn't catch that. What was that?
so I might be working from home on January 10th too. So still working on my new term schedule.
Well, we'll work it out. We're on your schedule. Thanks all.
All right, guys. Happy holidays, everyone.